Bella used to wake up every morning in a small but warm apartment filled with the smell of fresh coffee and the soft hum of the city outside. Her husband, Daniel, would smile at her from across the kitchen table while the sunlight poured in through the window. They were not rich, but they had love and laughter, and that was enough for her. The sound of Daniel's voice telling her about his day and the way he reached for her hand during quiet moments made Bella believed that their marriage was unshakable. She worked at a local flower shop, where the air was always sweet with roses and lilies. Daniel worked in a modest office downtown and often came to pick her up after work. They would walk home together, sharing small jokes and talking about plans for the future. Bella thought their life was simple, yet perfect. She had no reason to doubt the man she had promised to spend her life with. Then one ordinary morning, everything changed. Bella had been feeling tired for weeks, and her skin had begun to pale. She told herself it was just stress from work, but Daniel insisted she visit a clinic. The doctor examined her, and after a long silence, delivered words that shattered her world. Bella had contracted a rare contagious illness. The doctor explained that it could be treated, but fear began to wrap itself around her heart like cold chains. Daniel was silent on the way home. He did not hold her hand. That night he slept on the couch without explaining why. Bella told herself it was because he was scared, but deep down, she felt something shift in him. The next few days, whispers began to spread through the neighborhood. People who used to greet her now crossed the street to avoid her. Friends she had known for years stopped answering her calls. The flower shop owner politely told her not to come back until she was better, and Bella knew it was not kindness, but fear speaking. One evening, Daniel came home late. His eyes avoided hers as he told her that it was better for everyone if she left the city for a while. Bella stared at him, unable to believe what she was hearing. The man who had once promised to stand by her in sickness and in health now spoke as if she were a burden to be thrown away. He said there was a place far from the city where she could stay until she recovered. His voice was cold and final. 2 days later, Bella found herself on the back of a rusted truck with a small bag of clothes. The road was long and dusty, leading to a village she had never heard of. When she arrived, the air smelled of rot and stagnant water. Houses leaned on each other as if ready to collapse, and the streets were littered with broken wood and scraps of metal. Children stared at her with hollow eyes, and stray dogs followed her at a distance. Daniel did not come with her. He handed her a small amount of money and left without looking back. That night, Bella lay on a thin mat in a room with cracked walls, listening to the sound of rats scratching in the corner. Her chest ached not from her illness, but from the betrayal that had cut deeper than any wound. She had been cast aside like something worthless and left in a place where people were barely surviving. She felt the weight of loneliness pressed down on her, but somewhere beneath the pain a spark began to burn. The first week in the village was the hardest Bella had ever lived through. The air was damp and heavy, with the stench of waste. Her small room was shared with 2 old women who coughed through the night. She could hear the distant cries of babies and the angry shouts of men from outside. Food was scarce and often tasted spoiled, but she forced herself to eat because she knew her body needed strength. Days passed slowly. Bella wandered through narrow, muddy paths where stagnant puddles reflected the broken roofs above. Flies buzzed constantly, and the smell of rotting garbage clung to the air. She learned quickly that no one here had time for kindness. People kept to themselves, fighting for what little they had. The illness inside her body made her weak and dizzy, but she refused to collapse in front of them. She would not give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her defeated. At night, she thought of Daniel. She pictured him sleeping peacefully in their apartment, eating at the table they had once shared, maybe laughing with neighbors who now spoke of her as if she were dead. She replayed the moment he told her to leave, the emptiness in his eyes, the absence of love in his voice. She realized then that he had never truly loved her. If he had, he would have fought beside her instead of sending her to rot in this forgotten place. Bella began to walk outside every mornings, even when her body ached. She told herself she needed to see the world beyond her room. She helped carry water for a family who lived nearby in exchange for a bowl of rice. She started washing clothes for an old man who could not stand for long. Each small task kept her moving and distracted her from the loneliness clawing at her chest. One afternoon, she found an abandoned shack near the edge of the village. The roof had holes and the walls were rotting, but inside, there was an old wooden table and a few broken shelves. Bella decided to make it hers. She cleaned the floor with water from the river and patched the roof with scraps of metal she found. For the first time since arriving, she felt a flicker of control over her life. Her illness did not vanish, but slowly she noticed her strength returning. She drank boiled herbs, given by a silent old woman, who lived at the far end of the village. The taste was bitter, but she swallowed it without complaint. She believed that every drop was bringing her closer to the day she could leave this place. One evening as the sun dipped behind the hills, Bella stood outside her shack and watched. The sky turned gold and crimson. She thought of the city she had been forced to leave, and the people who had turned their backs on her. She thought of Daniel's betrayal, and the way the world had treated her as if she were a danger instead of a person. In that moment, she made herself a promise. If she ever got out of this village, she would not return as the broken woman they had abandoned. She would return stronger, and she would make every single one of them regret what they had done. Weeks turned into months, and Bella learned to survive in the village, as if it were the only world she had ever known. Her hands became rough from carrying water and gathering firewood. The constant smoke from cooking fires stung her eyes, but she endured it without complaint. Her body still carried the shadow of her illness, yet each day she felt herself getting stronger. The old woman who had given her the bitter herbs began to speak to her more. Her name was Mara, and her face was lined with years of hardship. Mara knew about plants that could cleanse the body and strengthen the blood. She taught Bella how to find certain leaves in the forest and how to boil them until their essence filled the pot. Bella followed every instruction carefully, determined to drive the sickness out of her body. One afternoon, Bella sat by the river, washing clothes, when she caught sight of her reflection. The pale skin and hollow eyes that had once stared back at her were gone. Her cheeks had color again, and her shoulders looked stronger. She ran her fingers over her face and felt a strange sensation she had not felt in months. Hope. Still, life in the village was far from easy. Hunger was a constant shadow. Sometimes she went to bed with only water in her stomach. Rain would flood the dirt paths, turning them into rivers of mud. Yet Bella refused to give in to despair. She began saving small coins from the laundry and carrying jobs she did. She hid them in a cracked jar, buried under the floor of her shack. Every coin was a step closer to leaving. Mara noticed Bella's determination and gave her more tasks to do in exchange for food. She sent Bella to trade herbs in nearby hamlets, which meant walking miles under the hot sun. Bella never complained. The journeys made her stronger and gave her time to think. With every step, she imagined herself walking back into the city, not as the abandoned sick woman, but as someone who had rebuilt herself from nothing. One night, as she lay on her mat, listening to the wind rattle the loose boards of her shack, Bella remembered Daniel's face. She imagined him living comfortably while she fought rats for scraps of food. The thought no longer made her cry. Instead, it hardened something inside her. He had thrown her away like she was nothing, and she would make sure. He saw the woman she had become. By the end of the 3rd month, Bella could walk long distances without losing her breath. The cough that once kept her awake at night had vanished. She knew she was no longer sick, yet she stayed in the village a little longer. She wanted to leave not just as a survivor, but as a woman prepared for the life she would claim back. One morning as the sun rose over the ragged rooftops, Bella stood with a bundle of herbs in her hands and looked out at the narrow path that led away from the village. The road was long and uncertain, but her heart was steady. She knew the day was coming when she would take that path and never look back. The morning Bella decided to leave the village was quiet. A thin mist curled over the ground as she stepped outside her shack for the last time. She carried a small woven bag, filled with the coins she had saved, a few bundles of dried herbs from Mara, and a change of clothes. The weight was light on her back, but heavy with meaning. She had come to this place broken and discarded, and now she was walking out on her own terms. Mara stood at the edge of the dirt path waiting for her. The old woman handed her a bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside was a packet of powdered herbs and a small carved wooden pendant shaped like a leaf. Mara told her it would keep her body strong and her spirit focused. Bella pressed the gift to her chest and for a moment felt the sting of tears, but she did not let them fall. She had promised herself she would not look back. The first steps away from the village felt unreal. The air smelled different, outside the cluster of crumbling houses. The forest opened around her with tall trees that swayed and whispered in the wind. She walked for hours until her legs ached, resting only to drink from streams and eat the small rations she had packed. At sunset, she reached a dusty road where a worn-out bus was waiting. The driver looked at her with suspicion, but said nothing as she paid for her seat. She sat by the window, watching the landscape roll by, each mile putting more distance between her and the place where she had been abandoned to die. The bus took her to a small town that was cleaner than the village, but still far from the city she had once called home. Here, Bella found work in a roadside tea shop. She cleaned tables and served customers, earning just enough to pay for a shared room in a small boarding house. The work was tiring, but it felt like freedom. Compared to the suffocating hopelessness of the village, she spent her evenings reading old newspapers left behind by customers, trying to catch glimpses of the outside world. Sometimes she read about events in her city and wondered if Daniel ever thought of her. Did he believe she had died in that forgotten place? Did he still tell people she was too sick to return? The thought filled her with both anger and determination. Every coin she earned that was not spent on food or rent went into a small cloth pouch hidden under her mattress. She was saving for something greater than survival now. She was saving for her return. Late at night when the streets were quiet, Bella would stand at the window of her small room and stare into the dark horizon. Somewhere beyond those hills lay the city that had turned its back on her. Somewhere there were people who owed her the truth, the respect, and the justice they had denied her. She whispered a promise into the night. She would not return as the same woman they had thrown away. She would return as the storm they never saw coming. Months passed in the small town, and Bella transformed her life piece by piece. The constant work at the tea shop gave her stronger arms and quicker reflexes. The coins in her cloth pouch grew heavier with each passing week. She learned to bargain in the marketplace, stretching every bit of money so she could save more. The quiet determination in her eyes began to replace the haunted look she had carried for so long. One afternoon, while delivering tea to a group of travelers, Bella overheard them talking about a tailoring shop in the town that needed extra help. The owner specialized in sewing for wealthier customers who passed through. On their way to the city, Bella saw an opportunity. She visited the shop the next day and offered to clean, organize fabrics, and help with small stitches. The owner, a stern but fair woman named Leora, agreed to give her a trial. Working at the shop was different from the tea house. The fabrics were soft and expensive, and Bella learned the art of handling them with care. Leora noticed her patience and steady hands, teaching her to sew hems, repair tiers, and eventually design simple dresses. For the first time in years, Bella began to see herself in clean, well-made clothing instead of worn rags. She realized that changing how she looked was part of changing how the world saw her. At night, she practiced sewing by candlelight, using scraps that Leora allowed her to take home. She made herself a simple but elegant dress in a deep blue color. When she wore it for the first time, she hardly recognized the woman in the small cracked mirror. The thin, pale figure from the village was gone. Her skin had warmth, her posture was straight, and her eyes carried a steady fire. Bella began to interact more with customers, listening carefully to how they spoke, how they carried themselves, and how they negotiated. She studied their confidence, storing it in her mind like another skill to master. Slowly, she was not just saving money. She was preparing herself to walk into rooms where she had once been unwelcome and command attention. Leora noticed the change in her, and one evening asked if she planned to stay in the town. Bella simply smiled and said she still had places to go. In truth, she thought every day about the city she had left behind. She imagined walking through the streets again, seeing the shock on Daniel's face, and making him realize she had survived without him. One night as she sat sewing under the dim light of her room, Bella counted her savings. The amount was enough to take her back to the city and give her a start. She held the coins in her hands and felt their weight like the closing of one chapter and the opening of another. Soon, she would be ready to leave this place behind as well. The morning Bella decided to return to the city. The air was crisp, and the streets of the small town were still quiet. She had packed her few belongings into a sturdy cloth bag. Inside were her savings, the pendant Mara had given her, and the blue dress she had sewn herself. That dress would be her armor, a symbol of the life she had rebuilt from the ashes. She left the tailoring shop before sunrise. Leora stood in the doorway, watching her go, arms crossed, but eyes softer than usual. Without words, she gave Bella a small bundle of fine fabric scraps. Bella accepted it with a nod and walked toward the bus station, her steps steady. The bus ride was long, but Bella kept her gaze fixed on the road ahead. With every passing mile, the air felt more familiar. She could almost smell the bakeries that lined certain streets, hear the distant rumble of the city's morning traffic. But beneath the flickers of nostalgia was the steel in her chest. This was not a homecoming. This was the beginning of her reckoning. When she arrived, the city looked the same, yet different. Tall buildings cast long shadows across the streets, and the hum of life was everywhere. People hurried past her without a second glance, unaware of who she was or what she had endured. She found a small inn in an older part of town and paid for a week's stay. It was modest, but it gave her a base from which to move. Her first priority was gathering information. She walked through neighborhoods she once knew well, listening to bits of conversation, watching familiar faces from a distance. She learned that Daniel still lived in their old apartment, and that he now spent his evenings in the company of a younger woman. People whispered that he had done well for himself, but Bella knew appearances could be deceiving. She visited old acquaintances, under the guise of a traveler, looking for work. Some recognized her, but were too shocked to speak at first. When they asked where she had been, she only gave vague answers, never revealing the truth. She wanted the rumors to spread slowly, like the first ripples in still water before the storm hit. Bella spent her evenings writing in a small notebook she had bought at the market. She made lists. People who had turned their backs on her, people who had spread the lies about her illness, people who had laughed as she was sent away. Each name she wrote was a reminder of why she had returned. She also began seeking opportunities. With her skills in sewing and her sharp observations from the tailoring shop, she found temporary work, altering dresses for a boutique in the city's busy market district. The pay was good enough to keep her steady while she planned her next moves. One night, as she stood by the window of her small inn room, Bella looked at the city lights flickering in the distance. Somewhere out there, Daniel was living as though she had never existed. The thought didn't wound her anymore, it fueled her. Soon, he and everyone else who had cast her aside would know exactly who she had become. Bella knew revenge could not be rushed. It had to be carefully crafted. Each move precise, each strike timed perfectly. She began by observing Daniel from a distance. She followed him discreetly through crowded streets, blending into the flow of people. She noted where he shopped, who he spoke to, and where he spent his evenings. The younger woman by his side seemed oblivious to the past, laughing and leaning into him, as if he were a devoted partner. Bella almost pitied her, but pity had no place in her plan. Through whispers picked up in markets and small cafes, Bella learned that Daniel had been boasting about a new business venture. He was trying to impress wealthy investors, promising them high returns from a project that barely existed. To the public, he looked successful. To Bella, he looked vulnerable. She began making quiet connections. The boutique owner where she worked knew many influential clients who dined in expensive restaurants and attended charity events. Bella listened more than she spoke, subtly steering conversations toward Danielle's name. She let her words drip with polite curiosity, as though she had only heard rumors about his dealings. It was enough to spark doubt in the minds of people who thrived on gossip. Her next step was to elevate herself in the public eye. She wore the blue dress she had made, paired with accessories crafted from the fine fabrics Leora had given her. She walked into gatherings not as the abandoned wife of Daniel, but as a poised and confident woman whose origins no one could place. People noticed her. They asked who she was, and she gave only fragments of truth, letting mystery work in her favor. The younger woman with Daniel began hearing the murmurs. Bella made sure of it. At a market stall, she casually mentioned to a talkative vendor that Daniel was once married, but had sent his wife away under suspicious circumstances. Within days, the story traveled faster than she expected. She could see the shift in the younger woman's expressions when she walked beside Danielle. Doubt had begun to bloom. Meanwhile, Bella started collecting proof of Daniel's dishonest business. She befriended a clerk who worked in the office where Daniel met his investors. With small acts of kindness and well-placed coins, the clerk began sharing details, documents, numbers that didn't add up, promises Daniel couldn't keep. Each piece was stored carefully, waiting for the moment when it would matter most. At night, Bella sat in her room, looking at the growing stack of evidence and thinking of the years she had lost. The city outside was alive with lights and laughter, but inside her mind was a calm storm. Daniel had no idea that the woman he had discarded in a filthy village now stood just streets away, ready to dismantle everything he had built. She was no longer the weak, frightened Bella, who had begged for him to stay. She was the woman who had survived the impossible, and she was about to make him answer for every single thing he had done. Bella chose the night of a well-attended charity gala to make her first real move. The event was hosted in a grand hall, where wealthy donors and city officials gathered to be seen and praised. She knew Daniel would be there, eager to charm potential investors and flaunt his supposed success. She arrived dressed in an elegant gown she had crafted herself from the finest scraps Leora had given her. The deep green fabric hugged her frame, and her hair was styled simply, but with precision. She looked like she belonged among the elite, yet not a soul recognized her as the woman Daniel had once cast away. Inside the hall, chandeliers spilled light over polished marble floors. Waiters moved through the crowd carrying trays of champagne, and a string quartet played softly in the corner. Bella moved gracefully, greeting people with a polite smile, her eyes always scanning for Daniel. She spotted him near the center of the room, laughing with a small circle of men and women, the younger woman clinging to his arm. His suit was sharp, his posture confident, but Bella could see the faint lines of stress around his eyes. She didn't approach him directly. Instead, she began with the people in his circle. When introduced to a man who was one of Daniel's potential investors, Bella spoke warmly about the importance of trust in business. She didn't mention Daniel's name at first. She simply told a carefully woven story about a man she had once known, who promised great returns, but left his partners with empty accounts. Her tone was calm, almost regretful, as though she was speaking of a distant memory. The man listened closely. As the night went on, Bella repeated the story to others, changing small details each time, but keeping the essence the same. She made no accusations. She let them draw their own conclusions. By the time Daniel took the stage to give a short speech, Bella could see the whispers moving through the crowd like wind through tall grass. Faces that had been smiling moments earlier now held quiet skepticism. After the speech, Bella slipped away from the main hall into the side corridor, where she knew Daniel would pass on his way to the lounge. She stood partially in shadow, her eyes fixed on him as he walked by, deep in conversation with one of the investors. For a brief moment, his gaze caught hers. There was no recognition, only a flicker of curiosity, quickly masked. Bella turned and walked away before he could speak, leaving him with the unsettled feeling of having seen a ghost. That was exactly what she wanted. The seed of doubt had been planted, both in his mind and in the minds of those whose opinions mattered to his fragile empire. That night, back in her small inn room, Bella felt the first taste of victory. It wasn't loud or dramatic, it was quiet, like the first crack in a dam before the flood. She knew more strikes would come, each one stronger than the last, until, each carefully crafted, life collapsed around him. The whispers from the gala did not take long to grow into rumors. Bella had seen it before. Wealthy circles thrived on suspicion, and once it took root, it spread like wildfire. Daniel's charm still held some people, but cracks were beginning to show. Investors postponed meetings. Some associates started avoiding him in public. He tried to dismiss it all as envy, but Bella knew the weight was building. She decided it was time to use the evidence she had gathered. Late one afternoon, she visited a respected journalist who specialized in exposing fraudulent business schemes. She introduced herself under a different name and presented copies of the documents she had collected from the clerk, financial statements that didn't add up, contracts filled with empty promises, and records of funds that had quietly vanished. The journalist listened intently, asking careful questions. Bella never revealed her personal connection to Daniel. She framed the matter as public interest, a chance to protect people from being deceived. By the end of the meeting, the journalist agreed to investigate further, and Bella knew it was only a matter of time before the story broke. While she waited, Bella continued to make appearances at social gatherings. She was no longer invisible. People sought her out, intrigued by her composure and the air of mystery around her. She never spoke directly against Daniel, but she made sure his name was always tied to words like risky and unstable. The younger woman by his side began showing signs of strain, her smile tighter, her laughter forced. A week later, the first article appeared. It wasn't a full exposé, but it hinted at irregularities in a certain high-profile investment project. The description was vague enough to avoid legal trouble, yet clear enough for those in the know to connect it to Daniel. The headline alone was enough to make his phone ring non-stop. Bella watched from a distance as the pressure mounted. More articles followed, each one sharper than the last, with leaked figures and testimonies from anonymous sources. Investors pulled out. Deals collapsed. Daniel's confident stride turned into a hurried walk, his eyes scanning crowds, as if searching for the source of his downfall. One evening, Bella walked past the old cafe they had once visited together. Through the glass, she saw Daniel sitting alone, his face buried in his hands. For a moment, she felt the ghost of the love she had once felt for him. But it vanished quickly, replaced by the memory of the night he sent her away without looking back. She continued walking, her heart steady. The storm was still building, and Daniel had not yet felt its full force. The night of the final blow was not loud or chaotic. It was deliberate, a gathering carefully chosen to expose Daniel in front of the people who had once admired him. The city's annual winter banquet was a prestigious event, drawing business leaders, politicians, and journalists. Bella had received an invitation through the boutique owner she now worked with. She knew Daniel would be there, desperate to repair his image. She arrived early, wearing a gown of deep crimson silk she had tailored herself. The color was striking, a deliberate choice. Red was a statement, a warning, and a symbol of power. Her hair was swept back, her posture regal. There was no trace of the abandoned wife from years ago. She was someone entirely new. The banquet hall glittered with crystal chandeliers and polished silver. The murmur of conversation filled the air, punctuated by the clinking of glasses. Bella moved through the room with quiet grace, exchanging greetings and nods, until she found herself in the same circle as Daniel. He saw her before anyone introduced them. His face froze, the color draining from it as recognition struck. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The younger woman who had once clung to him was absent. Rumor had it she had left weeks earlier. Danielle's eyes flickered with disbelief, then narrowed with suspicion. Bella smiled faintly, as if they were mere acquaintances. Her voice was calm when she spoke. "It has been a long time, Daniel." Before he could respond, the evening's program began. A well-known journalist, the same one Bella had given the documents to, took the stage to present an award for integrity in business. But before handing out the honor, he addressed the importance of transparency and the dangers of fraudulent practices. His words cut sharply, and the murmurs began as he cited a very recent case involving a man whose schemes had collapsed under the weight of truth. The name came last, Daniel Gray. A ripple went through the crowd. Some faces turned toward him in shock, others in disappointment. Daniel stood rigid, his jaw tight, but there was no defense he could give. The evidence had already been made public, printed in black and white in the city's leading papers. Bella watched him, her expression unreadable. When he finally looked at her again, there was no anger in her gaze, only the cold certainty of someone who had already won. She leaned closer, just enough for him to hear her words over the noise. "You left me to rot, Daniel. I survived, and I made sure you never forget it." She straightened and walked away, her crimson gown sweeping across the marble floor. Conversations buzzed behind her, Daniel's name now heavy with disgrace. Outside, the winter air was sharp and clean. Snowflakes drifted lazily through the street lamps' glow. Bella took a deep breath, feeling the weight she had carried for years finally lift. She had not only survived, she had taken back her life and left her mark on the city that once turned its back on her. She walked into the night with steady steps, not toward revenge anymore, but toward the future she had built with her own hands. The past was behind her, and for the first time in years, it no longer had the power to touch her.